What is up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Parties, a show where I just try to take a more middle-of-the-road approach to things like politics and discussing issues and things like that without falling into the rhetoric of the two-party system, which is not always easy in this day and age. With a two-party system in place, it's definitely hard to not enter into the conversation trying to set yourself apart of that two-party system. It's really easy to kind of slip into the rhetoric that is tossed around, especially this time of year. We just had the election, and I'm sure everyone is obviously aware that Trump won. Some people are surprised, some people are not. I don't necessarily want to talk right now about the nitty-gritty details about the election or my personal thoughts on it or anything. What I do want to talk about is this sort of dialogue that has been going on with regards to the election. You probably have noticed that for both Democrats and Republicans, they presented this election very, very much as you're battling for the soul of the nation. Democrats definitely have used that sort of rhetoric the entire time. We're fighting for democracy. We are fighting to keep America free and equal, and we're fighting for everything that makes America what it is. And Trump and the Republicans have used a lot of the same sort of rhetoric, presenting Democrats as an enemy that are trying to destroy the country, and that a Biden presidency or a Harris presidency was going to result in the destruction of the nation as we know it. I've definitely, in scrolling through comments on social media and news outlets, I've seen a lot of comments talking about, in the lead up to the election, talking about how if Trump wins, this is going to be the very last Democratic election we have, and moving forward, we're going to have something very different. Republicans have talked very strongly in similar terms that if Biden were elected or if Harris were elected, America would just come crashing down. Now, none of this is anything we've ever seen before. In the entire history of the country, we've never seen a president get elected who was able to just bring the entire system crashing down, or who has been able to just shove the Constitution aside completely and just do their own thing, or usurp power illegally. But that is how it was presented in this election. This idea that the president, whoever was elected, was going to, I guess, wield this massive power and be able to just completely decimate the country as we know it. So my question I want to talk about, and sort of the direction I want to bring this conversation, is why exactly do we have this mentality that the president, the office of the president, is such a powerful and such an important office that whoever we elect in that office could potentially destroy the entire country? That seems, doesn't it, a little contrary to the entire concept of America. Like, a whole revolution was fought basically to stop a king or a parliament from directly interfering in our lives so much and to let us be free. We threw off that sort of system where we had like this one figurehead who was in charge of everything, and now we've sort of developed this mentality that the president is such a powerful and influential figure in the country that electing the wrong person could potentially cause the entire destruction of the nation. So first, I want to actually just go directly to the text of the Constitution, because I think that's always really, really important, and see exactly how much power the president is really allowed to wield according to the actual text. So everything about the president is pretty much found in Article 2. That's all about the executive office. Section 1 deals a lot with how the president is to be elected, deals with like what the qualifications are for president. But once you get to Section 2, Section 2 and 3 are about the actual powers of the president. So starting with Section 2, the president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, and of the militia of the several states, when called into the actual service of the United States. He may require the opinion, in writing, of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices. He shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. He shall have power, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur, and he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. But the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior offices as they think proper, in the president alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. The president shall have power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session. Now moving on to Section 3, he shall from time to time give to Congress information of the state of the Union, and recommend to the consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses, or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them, with respect to the times of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such a time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers, and shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States. So you can see, the President of the United States does not actually have a lot of power, and almost all of it is limited to being Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, being able to meet with ambassadors, with working with the Senate, making treaties, and then just ensuring that the laws are faithfully executed, which is really the entire purpose of the executive branch of the government, is the actual execution of the laws. So it's kind of astounding that when people look at that, that somehow connects to this big, grand office. I've definitely heard on more than one occasion, and you'll hear this in the media a lot too, that the presidency is the most powerful office in the land, or the most powerful office in the world, or the most influential office in the world. And when you look at the actual Constitution, and when you look at the reasoning behind why the presidency was set up the way it was, the presidency was supposed to have very, very limited, very confined power. Like, the entire purpose was to create an office where the person elected wasn't going to be a king, where the person elected wasn't going to just be able to wave his hand and do whatever he wanted, and where the person who was elected was very strongly bound to the Constitution. The entire idea of the Constitution is that it expressly grants any and all authority, and as the 10th Amendment states, any powers not expressly granted to, the federal government, as outlined in the Constitution, go to the states, or to the people. So it's a little wild to me, I think, to look at the election and see how it was treated as, oh, we are fighting this big, giant battle for the soul of the nation, when the office of the presidency itself has such little power. But you definitely see that in the rhetoric surrounding the election. Biden, a couple of years ago, gave a speech where he said that we were fighting for the soul of the nation. Harris gave a speech where she straight up said that we were fighting for our democracy. In these rallies and these events, it was always presented as whoever is elected to the office of the presidency, that's going to decide, the future of the entire country. That's how much influence the actual president of the United States seems to have in the minds of a lot of people, including many of those who are running for that office. During the election, Trump made it very clear that he thought that either Biden or Harris would ultimately cause the destruction of the country if either of them were elected. Like, he presented it as this is also a battle for the very nation itself, because whoever gets elected to that office, they could completely just, like, destroy the entire nation. They could plunge us into a recession that we're never going to claw ourselves out of. They're going to let the country just completely fall apart because the states and the cities aren't going to be able to afford to take care of the population. The entire election cycle has been just this constant back and forth between the two major parties and those who are running for office, basically treating it like they are the saving grace and the opponent is going to absolutely destroy the country. And it's all come down to the president. You didn't hear very much about Congress. Like, you didn't hear a lot from Trump or Harris talking about, how important it was to elect proper congressmen or, vote for senators that you agree with or any of that. You didn't hear them talk at all, really, about the soul of the nation being decided, in the fight for congressional office, even though Congress really has a lot more power than the President of the United States does. Instead, it all came down to the president. Like, whoever won that election was going to either set the country right or was going to cause its absolute destruction. And it all came down to who got elected specifically to that office. Now, some of that does come for fear of Supreme Court nominees. Both parties have been a little vocal about their fear that the next president will get to potentially choose another couple nominees to the Supreme Court, but that still has to be confirmed by the Senate. Like, you can't the president does not get to pick whoever he wants on the Supreme Court or she wants on the Supreme Court, and then you just call it good. The president has a lot of checks on their authority. And the issue is people seem to be forgetting that, and people seem to have created this narrative that, the President of the United States could literally destroy the country just within the matter of years. A country which has been built and has evolved and has grown for much of the past 3 centuries. And I think it just shows what a far cry we are from what the office was originally intended to be and what it really is. A couple weeks ago, I was lucky enough to get to go see Hamilton, and one of the characters in that play is obviously George Washington. And, some people really like him, some people not as much. I know he's a little bit more of a controversial figure now than he was probably 50, 60 years ago. But one thing that is really, one thing that really stands out about his character is how he treated the office of the presidency, which is he wanted to make sure that it was something that was limited. And there's a whole song in the play where he and Hamilton sing about wanting to teach the public how to say goodbye. And Washington makes that, he sings that song when he makes the decision that he's going to step down after 2 terms. And even though he has disagreements with Thomas Jefferson, who left his cabinet in order to be able to run to be president himself, he was willing to step away because he knew that, establishing this precedent of moving on and having us change leaders and having us change ideas and having us change focus and having the people being able to elect, new people to the office, like, that was all core to the American experiment. And it didn't matter if he disagreed politically with the person who was running against him. And part of that was because of how limited the office of the presidency was. Like, there's not a lot the president legally is allowed to do. And so when Washington voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, back when he didn't have to, and he could have feasibly and more than likely could have been president for the rest of his life, he opted not to do that. And I think that's really important, especially when you're looking at how people view the presidency today, where they look at it as almost like this all-encompassing office that, the presidency is almost like a kingship, where he can really just do just about whatever he wants. And to a certain extent, that's probably more true with the two-party system. The president is able to do a lot more when he has Congress and the Supreme Court who align politically with their philosophy. And that's a whole other discussion about how the two-party system has sort of weaponized that, especially the Supreme Court, in order to push through things that constitutionally probably shouldn't have been done. But it doesn't change the fact that the office of the presidency is still very limited in scope. Whoever is elected, and of course in this case it was Trump, but we've also been through a Trump presidency before, and even though he made a big issue about how he didn't think he legitimately lost the election and he thought he should still be in power, he wasn't able to just swipe the entire Constitution aside. He wasn't able to just seize power and maintain control, and that's not going to happen this time. Whatever your thoughts are on Trump, he's not, at the end of these 4 years, going to be able to just seize power and maintain control for another, decade or so. Like, that's just not how the system works. He's not going to be able to end elections. He's not going to be able to override the states. And, you can make the argument that he potentially tried that last election, and it failed because the system is in place to stop it. The Constitution is in place specifically to limit, would-be dictators. The whole purpose of the Constitution is to limit someone who, if they were going to try to use that power to seize that kind of control, it stops them. That's why there's checks and balances. That's why we have a Congress. That's why we have a Supreme Court. That's why we have the states. The states are a really important aspect of that I think a lot of people forget, is that the states have just as much check on the federal government as the different branches of the federal government have on each other. It's just not possible for someone who is elected to just make these broad, sweeping changes. He can maybe make little changes over time, but I've seen a lot of comments online about how, he's going to pass amendments to the Constitution in order to change that. It's like, well, you need 3/4 of each house to be able to pass that. He does not have that in Congress. He doesn't have the ability to just snap his fingers and create legislation. That power still relies in Congress. A Congress that supports his party might pass more legislation that he agrees with, but he's not going to be able to create that himself. And chances are, here in a few years, we're going to switch back to the Democratic Party, because with the two-party system, we have a system where we tend to bounce back and forth. And that's, I think, why you saw Trump get elected this time, is because with the Democrats in charge and things not necessarily being perfect, there were a lot of people middle of the road who decided, we're going to try something else, or they just didn't vote at all because they were very uninspired by both candidates. But with the election over now, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of strife, there's a lot of people who are making a lot of claims, and ultimately I just want to say that, in 4 years, things are going to be different again. Like, this is how the system works. You can love Trump or hate him. In 4 years, he's not going to be our president anymore. Like, we're going to be moving on to someone else, and that is just the way the system works. The president just does not have the ability to seize the sort of power that I think a lot of his opponents have been making it seem like he can do. And, for Trump's part, he's also done quite a bit of demonizing the other party and the other side and trying to make it sound like, a Democratic president would completely destroy the country. It's like, well, we've just had 4 years of a Democratic president. Were things perfect? No. Did things fall apart to the point where the country as we know it has been completely destroyed? No. And that's what these candidates, I think, don't realize when they're making these claims, is we've gone through years and years of both Republican and Democratic candidates. we've had both sides elected to office multiple times, and both sides tend to make a lot of mistakes. Both sides tend to do things that are good. But one thing that you haven't seen is a sort of seizure of power, or the complete and absolute annihilation of everything America is and what America stands for, because, the wrong person, quote unquote, was elected into office. That just doesn't happen. So it's really too bad to see this rhetoric continue when ultimately it's doing a lot more harm for the country than good, because it's creating the perception for the public that the presidency is this all-encompassing office, and it's getting people more and more used to the idea that the president does have all this power, and the president can do all these things, and he isn't necessarily bound by the Constitution. And public perception of that is going to cause way more harm than either candidate getting elected into office, because if the people believe that the president has that power, then that's what's going to allow him to seize it. It's not going to be a lack of checks and balances. It's not going to be a lack of a system. It's not going to be a lack of voting. It's going to be people just assume that the president of the United States has these abilities and has this authority. And that's what we need to watch out for. That's what we need to be fighting against, is this concept that the office is, a kingship. The idea that the president can destroy the country or can save the country, because really, the president's authority is very small. It's mostly confined to the military, to treaties, and to just making sure that laws passed by Congress are being executed effectively. The president doesn't get to make up his own laws. He doesn't get to interpret the law. There's always going to be some scope of interpretation, no matter who you are. But the president doesn't get to just, look at a law and decide, okay, well, I know it's never been looked at this way before, but I'm going to decide that the law means this. That's just not the way it works. And those checks and balances are in place. And if you're worried about it, the important thing is to participate, to get out and make sure you're campaigning for the right people and getting people who you feel would be suited for office, running for office, and making sure that you vote and making sure that your voice is heard. Doing things like starting a podcast like I did, or writing a blog, or even just having conversations with people. The important thing is to just be involved and make sure that, you're continuing the dialogue and not letting either major political party completely control the rhetoric. Because when you do that, it's essentially a war zone. And that's what politics has become right now, is it's not trying to find the best candidate and trying to find the best systems. It's how do we beat the Democrats, or how do we beat the Republicans? And that's what they turned the presidency into, is just this big giant battle with claims that if the wrong person was elected, the country would be destroyed. That anyone who voted for someone who wasn't me is responsible for just whittling away at the country before it completely gets annihilated come January when he takes office, or she takes office. And in this case, it's Trump. And yeah, we'll see how the next 4 years go. But ultimately, all the panic that this was the last Democratic election, or this is, the end of America as we know it, or, we're about to see the start of, Nazi Germany 2.0, none of that is anything but fear-mongering, because ultimately that's just not the way the system works. So yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, and, hopefully you're staying educated and making sure that you're verifying sources, and just if you're hearing candidates who are running for office say it, make sure you're double checking, because those candidates are in fact running for office, and we haven't necessarily had the greatest selection of candidates for a while, mostly because the two-party system just kind of absolutely dominates that. So you're getting a selection of people who fit the party mold and not necessarily people who are going to be best for you or the country. And yeah, I hope you guys are all having a good day. I'm going to start posting on this pretty regularly. If you're interested in this kind of thing and want to help me grow it, definitely visit my Patreon. The link will be in the description. That'll help a lot. Anything will help, but there's no obligation. And yeah, you guys have a good day, and let's stay educated.